Adam Whitty, welcome to another episode of Build Your Authority.
Bartavia.
Oh, okay. That was it. Okay. Thanks, Adam, for my wonderful introduction. It's become part of the show and the brand. I think all our fans expect you to do that. So please don't ever stop doing that, Adam. But today, we're going to dig into books. So last week we were talking about blogs, short form. So now we're going to go up to the big boys, the long form books. And this is sort of what you built your business on. And let's talk about that. The jump from short form to long form. We mentioned some of the nuances and differences, but to you, what are the bigger differences from working with a blog content as opposed to a book?
Well, with a book, number one, it is a foundational tool to building your thought leadership as a business leader, as a CEO, as an entrepreneur. So creating a book, it's a foundation for everything else that you may do as a thought leader. That's one thing. The second thing is that, when I think about writing a book, what is the problem to be solved? And I always say to prospective authors, you've got to bait the hook to suit the fish, not the fisherman. So it's not about writing the book that you want to write. It's about writing the book that solves the problems and the needs that your target audience has, right? That's how you make a book sticky. That's how you make a book, in many ways kind of magnetic, where it spreads. So having a message that is solving the problems of your target reader is something really, really important. And my observation is many people say, I want to write a book and it's what I want to write about. Well, what you may want to write about is not necessarily something that anybody wants to read.
Right.
So, begin with the end in mind, to quote the late Stephen Covey. What is it that your target audience is worried about? What's keeping them up at night? And then, do you have knowledge? Do you have information that can aid them? And how do we put that in long form, which is a book?
And that is the macro of it. And on this episode, we're going to get into the micro of it, like how this book actually gets made. And we are joined by Kristin Hackler, our director of book planning. She's had a couple decades in this business, but she is experienced in transforming entrepreneurs' ideas, like you mentioned, Adam, into impactful books. So without further ado, Kristin, welcome to Build Your Authority.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm sorry I don't have a fancy intro line for you. But it's
Oh,
good to
no,
see
it's totally fine, Kristin. You were you were doing well enough. That's all good. Thank you so much. And before we get started in the conversation, Kristin, I mentioned that you've been doing this for quite a while. But why you've been doing this quite a while? What is your why for helping entrepreneurs develop their ideas and the stuff we're going to get into the conversation today? And what does it do for you?
That is a great question, Joe. Every day, I mean, it's true, but every day I'm learning something new. Every day I'm discovering some other way of looking at the world. And I know this is something we'll be talking about soon, but it's perspective. What's a slightly different angle? You can look at something that might seem old, but now that I see it this way, it makes so much more sense to me. So that, but also, I mean, truly, our authors are helping to change the world. They are, by putting these thoughts out there, by driving these changes, by helping people see a new way to look at things like, healthcare and business leadership and culture and all those sorts of things. They're driving that positive change that is making the world a better place. So what better role could you have than that?
Joe, Kristin is referred to internally as the author whisperer. And that is that she has this uncanny ability to really understand what an author wants to communicate, when at times even the author can't articulate exactly what it is that they want to communicate. She may have mind reading abilities, but the point here is that it really is as much art as it is science. I mean, there is a process that we follow that can help generate positive results, but you also have to have really talented people, and Kristin is absolutely one of the best.
Yeah, and so let's start with the big picture, Kristin, in terms of the connection of you and the entrepreneur to developing a book that will sort of intertwine their personal narratives, their experience, and then use that to build their thought leadership.
It begins with what is it that they need to do? What is it they need to change? What is it that when the person puts that book down after reading it, now they need to do this, they want to do this, their mindset has been changed in a certain way. And sometimes it takes a little bit of back and forth to get there. Now, part of the magic you're talking about, Adam, I think, is just being able to read people. When you get excited about something, you lean in a little bit. Your voice gets a little bit higher. You get a little bit more, you talk more and you go down that alley a little bit more. So when you find those threads, that's when you're like, oh, maybe there's something about that. An author recently was trying to figure out how to convey the importance of gosh, it was finances, and he was trying to talk through a certain way of seeing it, and he just started talking about his time as a black belt. And the way he described that, it aligned so well with what he was trying to explain in financing. We found a way to bring the two together and explain to people how you need to have that mentality, that mindset, the doing the small things in order to do the complicated things, and progress in small steps toward, success. So it's those elements. It's not something you could really write down and say, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will then have your book idea. It's more find the things that make you passionate, that get you excited. And also when you start to share it with somebody, they get excited about it too.
Kristin, so many of the authors you work with are entrepreneurs. They're CEOs, they're business leaders. And a lot of times they do have business goals that they're trying to achieve. And the book is a vehicle and a way for them to reach some of those business goals. So, what is the first step an entrepreneur should take to ensure that they create a book that is aligned with their business goals?
Absolutely. So that's part of that ideation process is coming up with what is it we're trying to move? What is it we're trying to achieve? This is why, too, I really appreciate the way you guys have set this up, that we also have a member of our marketing team joining us so that we are always thinking about bigger picture. So it's not just the story, it's not just the compelling literature, it's not just that goal we're trying to achieve. We're also looking at how that book can play out far beyond its publication date. So when we're talking through what it is we're trying to get the audience to do, we're also saying, are you trying to also increase your authority in this certain area as a leader in this profession, in this thought area? Do you want to be on stages? Do you want a professorship? Do you want this to bring more people in the door? If we think about all of those elements, it really helps us speak to, Adam, as you were saying earlier, what the audience needs, not so much what the writer wants.
Yeah. So, Kristin, you've done this many, many times. What is the most rewarding transformation you've seen an author experience as a result of publishing their book?
I think one of the best things that ever happened, and then this happens with a lot of authors, but some of them actually reach out, some of them actually come back to the office to tell us about these experiences. And one author in particular, it changed people for the better. And they came to him and told him this. They said, "You made me a better person because of this book. You made me my life more positive." And he was so excited about this feedback. He's only getting it from a few people at first. He's been getting more and more since then, but he actually had to come back to our office and tell everybody that worked on the book about it because he was so excited about the true impact. It was doing exactly what he wanted it to do. So I think it's really when you are changing, you are helping, you are making that positive impact, even if just one person, responds to you, it's affecting so many more.
Yeah, I say all the time, the right book in the right person's life at the right time can change their life forever. And
Absolutely.
and there is great truth to that. Uh, Kristin, as you know, there are many CEOs and entrepreneurs that will come to us and they'll say, "Hey, I know I want to do a book, but I'm not sure what it's about." And we have a Herculean task, although it's something that we have become quite adept and strong at helping them figure out, what is the angle. So, um, let's take one of those entrepreneur CEO authors that says, "I know I want to do a book, but I'm not sure what it's about." How do you help them identify the big idea and help them make sure that their book will stand out in a very crowded market, in a very crowded world?
Absolutely. Excellent point. And that is the tough one. And that it really it comes back to that perspective. I mean, you look at Simon Sinek, start with why. You know, that statement's as old as time, but he found a way to make it unique, to make it stand out, to see a new way of looking at that question. Or even how that question applied to their lives. So that's what we're looking for. There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new ways to look at things. And so that's what we're trying to help the author discover. So they might have this goal of helping people see what the near future is going to look like in terms of, say, technology or something like that. But how can they speak to the audience that they're trying to impact? Say, if that was the topic, if you're trying to speak to CEOs, how is that actually going to affect your audience now? And what is that going to look like in 3 years? And actually make them see it. Do it quick, do it fast, because if you're talking to entrepreneurs and CEOs, you need to get a point across that point, in about a paragraph. But that's you need to be thinking about, again, it's that audience and how did they receive information. One of our authors very early on, and like I said, I'm being dated here. I've been here almost 10 years, Adam, and I can think back to when we're our little office and we were talking to authors and coming up with all these great ideas. And one of the very first people I worked with told me this rule, and it has stuck with me ever since. He said, "Remember, Kristen, it's not the golden rule, it's the platinum rule. It's not do unto others as you would, it's do unto others as they would have done unto them." And so that's what I try to think about when I'm thinking about our audience. How are they going to absorb this information best? So that's part of that whole, you have to have all these elements. It's not a linear process. You're looking at books from every 360-degree angle, especially during the book planning phase.
And Adam, we're doing a podcast here, and people say, there's a lot of podcasts. There's too many podcasts. Well, and then people on the flip side will say, there's books. There's so many business books. What's going to make my book unique? Kristen, that word unique is the challenge for, I think, many of our authors. Like, they just don't want to regurgitate something that's been written about over the last 100 years in business books. So talk to me about the magic of uniqueness and trying to find a way to differentiate one business book from the other.
Exactly, and it comes back to how can you shift the angle of the prism that you're looking through? So if you're thinking about your audience, and I'm gonna keep using examples of recent authors, but they are also exciting, and they're all keep coming up with these great ways of thinking about things. One of them, not long ago, we were talking about, like, we need to speak to, college students, early graduates, people who have a very fast-paced, in a different way, sort of way of perceiving information. How can we capture them? And something that resonates really well with that age group would be, kind of the detective novel style. I'm not saying write the book as a detective novel, but how can we take the elements of that to make it compelling and grasping, or gripping to their readership? So how do you put in those story beats? How do you get them excited? Like, you keep grabbing them at every subsection, almost like giving them a little cliffhanger while you're leading up to solving the mystery by the end of the book. So if you think about the book that way, then you figure out how to kind of weave in the goals that you're trying to achieve and make it stand out in a way that somebody perhaps hasn't thought about culture before, or hasn't thought about their own personal method of leadership before. The same thing happened with an author who wanted to speak to students who deal with attention deficit disorder. How can we make the book more visual without actually being visual? How do you create language that just speaks in colors and action? Basing it, we ended up deciding on the kind of graphic novel style. Again, we're not using a graphic novel, but how do graphic novels come together? So you have to look outside of your world to see how you can change and speak to the people you want to speak to by looking at the things that compel them.
Joe, one observation I'll share, and I know Kristen and I have seen this time and time again, is, many authors, they'll come to us and they'll say, I want my ideas to be unique. I want my ideas to be new. And I don't want to be a retread of other books that have been published. And the truth is, I don't think there's a new original idea left. Everything that could be said has been said. And so the challenge, but the opportunity, is what I call Diet Coke with lime, right? There was Coke, and then there was a twist, and it became Diet Coke. And then there was another twist, and it was Diet Coke with lime, right? And then it's another twist, and so on down the line. And so, as Kristen said, there are very few new, completely original ideas. but how do you take an existing idea, but through your unique prism, and twist it and frame it in a way that makes it uniquely different and uniquely yours. And that really is what an author should aspire to, not I have to come up with something that's original and new and has never been said before. Because with, more than 500,000 books published every year, that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And a lot of that, Kristen, is with research, right? It's something that you're involved with, and then the author probably comes in with as well. Like, hey, I've looked at the Amazon list. I know how does it on your side of things in book planning? How does market research fit?
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of market research, again, that's why I love that we work with our closely with our marketing team because they help, dig into that kind of stuff as well. Like what other books are out there, what other angles are people taking. Market trends too are very important to look at. So, again, when we're looking at our audience and our platinum rule, what are they interested in? What are they following? What is trending in their area? So looking at patterns like that also help us shape the direction and narrative. So it does play a big role, especially early on, to do that kind of digging in and finding out how we can, not only speak to that audience, but speak to what's on their minds now and going forward.
Hmm. And Adam, over the last couple of years, we've been seeing a lot of authors come in with the AI book. And as we know, we are drowning in AI books in this on this planet. Um, Adam, in terms of when trends like that come and they come with a hammer, like they just hit hard. When people come in that world, how do how do you feel about like, oh my God, do we need another AI book? Like, Adam,
Right.
what's your take on when the trend is so huge, it literally takes over an entire industry?
Yeah, so I think it all goes back to what is the unique prism that you have that can shape the content that makes it uniquely different, right? So to your point, there have been a number of books this year that we have published on the topic of AI, right? And we're one publisher of many. So the number of books this year that have been published on AI are probably in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands, right? But what is the unique prism? So, we had a book that came out recently, and it was specifically related to AI in healthcare, but it was specifically related to AI in healthcare delivered by the public sector, healthcare delivered by the public sector, which would be Medicare, Medicaid. And it was someone who had spent their entire career delivering healthcare in the armed forces. So they had lots of unique experience on healthcare is how healthcare is delivered through TRICARE, which is the military plus Medicare plus Medicaid, which is the other public paying healthcare system. And so that's what I would call that Diet Coke with a twist of lime, right? It's AI, but when you dial down one step and then another step and then another step, you say, wait a minute, this individual has a unique set of experiences, a unique prism in which he sees AI applied to healthcare that is so different and so unique that it's something that hasn't been done before. So that I think is really where there's a lot of topics that have been written about extensively. Leadership, a great example of that. Do we really need another book on leadership, right? But what is the prism in which you see leadership? What are the experiences you bring to the table as an author? And can that prism and those experiences be crafted in a way to create a unique book that truly is now in a category of one?
And that's why that core audience is so vital. I mean, you really need to get down to just like, what is that very unique person that needs to read this book? Adam, to your point on leadership, we had somebody who needed to speak specifically to CPAs. How do you lead? A CPA mentality is very different from leading a marketing firm. How do you work with them specifically? And sometimes you don't even realize how unique and informed your perspective is because you've lived it, you've been there. But when you start telling somebody else about it, they're like, I've never thought of it that way. And then speaking to CPAs all of a sudden becomes something that can apply to, a business focus, just like people who try to grow entrepreneurs, or it can speak to, computer design specialists. You have no idea how that is going to echo with other people when you speak specifically to that very unique core audience.
And Joe, that brings up a really important point, and I know that Kristen encounters this frequently. It is a lot of new authors will enter the process, and Kristin might ask, who is this book for? And they will say, everyone. There's not a single person that wouldn't benefit by reading my book. When I hear an author answer that way, I cringe, because there are very few books that are for everyone. And the amount of time and energy and money you would have to spend to promote a book so everyone would even know it exists, there isn't enough money in the world to make that happen. So the riches are in the niches, right? Kristin mentioned a book that specifically was written on the topic of leadership, but for certified public accountants, right? And how you lead accountants is different than how you lead an NFL franchise, right? So the more niche, the more specific, the more targeted your book can be, not only on the topic, but on the who the reader is for the book, the more dialed in that can be, the more success you're going to have with the book, not just from a benefiting and growing your business perspective, but also from a selling copies of the book perspective too.
Mm. And that's a callback to our conversation with Don Yeager. And another thing we talked in episode 1 of the season, and Kristin, we talked, a big part of it was storytelling. So I would love to know, and this is really more personal, is like, how do you help in the storytelling process? Because people get the idea of like, I have a story, I'm going to tell it. But how does it work when it's being published through a team like ours? And how do you play a part in helping them tell their story to help build that legacy at the end?
Absolutely. I love that you got to talk to Don about it because he is an amazing, amazing storyteller. And if I recall from some of what I've read from him, it's and also from our own experiences, immersion. It's bringing people into the story, and even if it's in a very short, brief way, you want them to feel. You want to touch on all of the senses. You want them to see, to experience, to make it resonate with them. So that's where storytelling comes in. We all know the old line, show, don't tell. I mean, it's old, but it's true. That's why it stuck around for so long. You don't tell them, first you do X, then you do Y, and as a result, you have Z. No, you need to take them there and let them draw their conclusions because it will apply differently to them. So get them into the story, get them experiencing it right along with you. If that requires doing a parable, if that requires just doing a very short half sentence, bring them into the story with you and create that moment where they really process what it is that you're trying to get across. So that's storytelling. It's truly essential. And Joe, you did some pretty darn good storytelling in your book too. So
I try. Well, luckily with the team here at Advantage helped me out with that. And it's funny. We talk about all these ideas of making the book, but um, in 2020, it took a pandemic for CEOs to learn the idea of vulnerability and empathy. So now we're 5 years on. Well, first of all, is that still a thing? Do entrepreneurs and CEOs still want to be vulnerable, Kristin? What
they
is that?
do,
Is that?
they absolutely do. And it's even more important now because humanity is becoming so valued. We don't want to be spoken to by all these like AI bots. I need a person to talk to me and tell me about their experiences so I can relate to it as a human being. So when you're vulnerable and you tell about your challenges and your hardships, when as you're telling that story, you feel that emotion like a rock inside your chest. That's when you know that you're getting that point across because when it's resonating with you, it's very likely resonating with your readers. So 100%. There's so many books out there that have echoed because the author was just kind of bared their heart. And that's when people say, I believe this person. I know this is true because I feel it too inside of me. I know it's a little woo-woo, but it's true.
Kristin, let's talk about structure for a minute. Every author that we work with, they begin with a first step, something we call an authority blueprint. And a big part of that is creating this executive book plan, which is really like a blueprint for their book before a single word is even written. So let's talk about structure. Give our listeners and viewers some tips on the most effective ways to structure a book so it engages readers from the very start and all the way to the finish.
That's a big question, Adam.
You are up for the task to answer.
I mean, it is unique to the message. I mean, you want to have a, a compelling beginning, middle, and end, but how are we going to convey that? Again, that comes back to target audience. That comes back to how they best absorb their information. When we're looking at creating that structure, that's part of that initial book planning conversation. When we have what we call the vision session, we're throwing the spaghetti against the wall and we're figuring out, does this need to be a little more of an academic style? Do we need to tell them what we're going to tell them, and then tell them what we told them? Do we need to make it more of a why and then a how structure? Do we need to make it more of the detective novel that I was talking about earlier? Does it actually need to have story beats and come to a cliffhanger and then draw you toward the mystery being solved at the end? So there's so many different ways to approach it. What you need to do is figure out, how am I going to speak to my readership? And when I'm trying to think about that, first, identify that audience, and then think about what connects most with them. What are those market trends? What are they reading? What are they drawn to? And then how can you create a way for your message to get to them in a way that they will accept it? Do they need to be celebrated, supported? Do they need to be thought provoking? Do they need to, physics? Do you need to talk about business from a physics perspective? That was one of our books that came out recently by Chip Higgins. How can I speak to that audience that needs to hear it? But always, always keeping it. I guess this is one of those root things that you need to ensure, is that you always are compelling, you're always engaging, and you're just keeping that attention, and you're coming back to a core theme, which I think, Adam, that thing that you hang your hat on, right? What is that line? What is that belief that we're trying to get across? Always coming back to that.
I'd love to peel the onion, Adam, on Kristen's title, book planning. And you mentioned, Kristen, about the woo-ness of it, but planning, there's nothing woo about planning. So so for folks who have not done the process of working with us and would work with a team like ours, what does that mean? Like, book planning, when they walk in and they're introduced to you, walk us through how that role works and how you help them to get to that point where they start to actually write the book.
Well, Joe, if you want to get a little more woo-woo, really, Kristen's title is Director of Book Architecture.
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
and book planning is part of what a book architect does. Um, but yeah, Kristen, enlighten our viewers and listeners of what does all that mean?
I mean, again, it's like you said earlier, it's art and science. It is. So first, you're understanding what are we being compelled to do? How are we compelling our readership? What is that engaging, aspect? Once we have that figured out, then we shift mindsets. We go from art to science, and now we're looking at it from that structural perspective. So, like I was saying earlier, if we're going story beats to cliffhanger to mystery at the end, if I were to use that example, there, whether you know it or not, there's a common structure that occurs in any book you read. Every chapter has a natural cadence to it that you come to expect. So you feel that, when I go into this, we're going to begin in a certain place. It's going to take me to this place, and we're going to go here, which is then going to lead into the next chapter. Now, if we do our job well, that is organic, and you don't feel like you're getting the same thing over and over again. You just know that you are excited to move on to the next part because you have an idea of what's going to come next, but you don't know exactly what that is. So when you're putting that together, what you want to do is you want to come up with that core foundation. Now you can look at other books that you have enjoyed and kind of analyze it yourself and say, okay, it looks like, Malcolm Gladwell here started with a story, and then he goes into statistics and does some analytics, and then leaves us with a little negative information that sums up the core theme of the chapter, but also leaves us hanging for the next thing that we're going to be talking about, which is next chapter. So if you think about it that way, how can I look at that skeleton? Then you can start saying, okay, now let's weave the tapestry a little bit more. What are those other threads that we need to incorporate into this core structure? So then you start adding your notes and you start saying, well, this needs to go here and this needs to go there. There are examples of people tackling this from so many different directions. One of my favorites is Joseph Heller, when he was doing Catch 22. You can actually find this online. Look up his book Plan, which is actually this huge grid, and it's been erased so many times you can barely see what the writing is on it, but it's kind of trying to plot out like what happens here, what happens there, who's going to be connected to this, and what are those little interactions happening along the way. So everybody has a different way of needing to structure these things, but ultimately what we do is create that skeleton on which, that story can be built.
And Joe, something really important, like flashing light, aha, aha, aha. Do not let what Kristen said escape you. Many people say, I want to write a book, and they open up their laptop computer and they stare at a blank screen, the blank screen of death, I call it. And many are paralyzed, but some will just start writing. They'll just start writing whatever idea comes to their head. And as they write their book, it's just whatever comes to them, whatever spirit moves them is what they write in the book. And oftentimes, once the book is done, it's a big pile of garbage. None of it connects together. There's no central theme. There's not a plot. There's not a problem to solve. It's just all kinds of random thoughts that the author might have at any one time. And so, as far back as Catch 22, and quite frankly, as far back as time when books began to populate this earth, there is a science and there is a formula into creating books. And so, let Kristin guide you here that to create a really great book, we do need to build a formula and a plan that your book will follow, whether you write it or whether you have a writing partner work with you to put those words onto paper. It doesn't matter. But without that plan, you're going to be confused. You're going to be exhausted. And whatever it is you create is going to be a big pile of gobbledygook.
I love that, Adam. And Kristen, thank you very much for breaking that down, because as a movie nerd, and people who watch this, who watch movies, know every movie has a 3-act structure. No matter if it's a Scorsese movie or if it's a Farrelly Brothers movie, like they all have the 3-act structure. And with books, people don't even realize that there is a structure to it, and that's where you come in. And another place where you come in, Kristen, is, and this is something that I've been on a high horse for a long time, is I'm too busy, Kristen. I can't possibly write a book when I'm built a company and I have 1,000 employees. There's no way I could write a book. So how does you and your team come into when it comes to the folks that say, like, I can't possibly have a single moment to stare at my computer and write a book?
You should go into voice acting, Joe.
No. That was actually pretty bad, but go ahead, please.
It's really it's baby steps. It's little things. So starting with the structure, you really do need to have a plan. You need to know what you're going for. You need to figure out what it is. I love when our book plans connect with the author. They you can see them. They get excited, like, yes, this is what I meant to say. So when you get that feeling, you're excited. You're like, yes, now I know. Now it makes sense to me how I need to convey this. Now you actually have your marching orders. You have a bullet point, and this bullet point says we need to help the readers understand a little bit more about X. So you don't need to sit down and write that down. That I don't have my phone with me. You can grab your phone and use the voice recorder and just, driving. I just need to share a little bit more about this. Get that transcribed, hang on to it, save it for later. Having that structure allows you to start putting this together. Now, some people taking that, you don't have the time to really actually take those words and make them into something engaging, which is why we work with ghostwriters, because they can take information like that, interview you, look at recordings, and use the whole wealth of their experience to help take the concepts and your intellectual property and weave that into that compelling story, into that engaging narrative that will really speak to that core platinum rule audience. So when you don't have time, and you truly don't, and you don't really want to, but darn, you're really good at talking about it, that's when you need to work with a writer.
Yeah, and Joe, you asked Kristen a great point, which is that, many CEOs, entrepreneurs, they dream of writing a book, but the reality is, man, they don't have the time to execute what's on their priority list today, let alone add a task as daunting as writing a book, adding that onto their list. And so as Kristen was sharing, the first question is, well, should I write it myself? Meaning do the actual typing of the words onto the screen? And the answer for many is that, hey, you've got all the content, you've got all the ideas, you've got all the expertise. Is there a professional writer where all they do for a living is write and write very beautifully and eloquently? Is there a writing partner that could work with you to help you channel your ideas, your knowledge, your wisdom, your stories into a book? And, this idea of I've got to do it myself is what keeps someone from ever getting a book done. If instead you say, hey, if I want something done well, I'm going to go seek an expert who's done it many times before, who can work with me, then you're much more likely to have success in getting that book done.
Mm. And I'm not sure if we're allowed to talk about this, Adam, but what is the percentage of folks who come in with a manuscript? Because we do have folks who say like, "Hey, I've actually written it. I've done this thing," and then obviously you guys will come in and massage it and do what it takes. What's the breakdown in terms of folks that have come in with like a completed or semi-completed manuscript, or like just coming in and be like, "Please help me. I can't do this by myself."
Yeah. So that ratio does change, right? Year to year, it's a little bit different, but as a rule of thumb, kind of in the history of our organization, and Kristin's been a fabulous part of our team for almost 10 years. It's historically been about 2/3, 1/3, where 2/3 of those business leaders will say, "Hey, I know I need a book. I know I want a book. I think I have something important to say, but man, I need help for you to get me to write that, right? I need a professional writer to sit down with me and partner with me to make that a reality." About 1/3 say, "Hey, I've written a book." Now, that book may not be ready for publication. That book may simply be a draft of their writing that then needs thorough editing, from developmental editing to line editing to copy editing and so forth. But historically, it's been about 2/3 have an idea, and that's it. And about 1/3 actually have either a full manuscript written, or at least large chunks and pieces of a book already written.
And a question we like to ask them when they do come to us with either a partial or full manuscript is, how much gas do you have left in the tank? Like, how much more do you want to put into this? Because, what will often work with them is like, okay, like this would really be, the only thing missing here. We just need to tighten this up a little bit. We need to get that core point, really clarified in each chapter, for example. So, depending on what they come to us with, we'll give them that guidance and they can then take that and apply it themselves. They can work with a book coach, for instance, somebody who can kind of help lead them through it. Or work with and then the developmental team will always come through and help them out. One thing that I've always appreciated about this company is that our teams are just thoroughly that's I'm not just saying this because it just it's truly we're all dedicated to quality. We want this to be the best possible book out there, and so we're going to pour ourselves into this to make sure it just shines. So that's why we are honestly excited when some of these well, actually when any of these manuscripts come through, is we can see what they're trying to achieve, and how do we get them across that last little bit of the threshold.
And Joe, something that will be a bit counterintuitive to our listeners and viewers, and I'll use an analogy. My wife and I are renovating our home right now. And we live in Charleston, and so surprise, it's an old home, like, built in 1800. And we're doing a renovation and we're doing an addition. And many times our builder has said, it would be easier and cheaper if we were simply to build you a new home from scratch. And I use that analogy because if you decide, I think I'm going to try to write this book myself on my own, it's hard to do. And then you have a partially written book and you say, okay, I need a coach. I need a book doctor to help me fix this and fill in the holes and make it complete. Well, Kristin will tell you, oftentimes it's easier just to start with a fresh sheet. So working together from scratch oftentimes is easier than working together with a partially written manuscript that then needs editing and a remodel and a renovation and then an addition and so on down the line. So if somebody listening is saying, gee, should I try to do it myself, or should I just start with a writing partner from scratch? Oftentimes it can be easier and cheaper to start fresh from scratch, with a writing partner than trying to renovate a manuscript that you write after lots of time, energy, and probably curse words that are thrown into the air.
Although I guess, Adam, it's too late for you. You are deeply into that renovation, so you can't
Yeah.
do anything about that. We should wrap this up talking about legacy, Kristin. And I always joke that a lot of people want to write a book that's going to have a lifelong legacy. And my favorite analogy to bring up is Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. If you were to read that book now, half those companies that were considered great are out of business. Like Circuit City is one of the examples that he gives for being a great company. People watching, listening to this may not even know what Circuit City is, but in this tome that is a legendary business book, it's dated. So how do we connect legacy and book writing? And of course, stuff is always going to be dated because it's on a paper and it can't be rewritten. But how do we develop legacy of a book so that it connects with readers well past the date of publication?
Well, I mean, everything, all the examples are going to become dated at some point. How to win friends and influence people. I mean, what it is that makes that book memorable is its principal foundations. What you're not writing a book to talk about, what came out in the news yesterday. That's what blogs are for. That's what your marketing materials for. That's when you elucidate on a certain point that you've made in the book. The book is for the foundation. You're trying to get across principles that are not immovable, but can really inform more specific tactics down the road. That can help you think about how I should approach something. It's more about mindset, and it's more about how should I be looking at this, like that prism, slightly differently. And then the specifics of how you can apply that. That's when you start to get into the world of, more, just putting your thoughts out there in the moment with, social media and things like that.
Yeah, and Joe, one thing to mention that's an important principle here is that, yes, Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is now almost 25 years old. Half the case studies in the book are either relics or had lost their way, or in the case of Circuit City, don't exist anymore. Yet, the book still does sell. And the book is still considered, a business tome, and it's still required reading in lots of graduate programs in business. And of course, Jim Collins followed that book up with many, many more since then. But Jim Collins is still seen today as one of, the great business thought leaders of our time, and, speaks frequently around the world. And so that's another thing to remember, is that even though some of the case studies and some of the examples and some of the stories will lose relevance, it doesn't mean that the book becomes irrelevant.
I love that. I love that. Kristin, if folks wanted to connect with you, find out more about you, learn more about book architecture, where should they start?
Well, I mean, they can pop by our website. I think probably the Authority Company, Adam, I would say, is the best place to get started, and to come check out more of like all the many different things that we do. And then they are always welcome to set up a call with a member of our team. Book planning is one of our most favorite things to do. So reach out.
Yeah, and Joe, as I mentioned, that first step, something called an authority blueprint, is perhaps one of the most transformational things that a prospective author can do to give them clarity and to give them confidence that there is a message here that is worthy to be delivered. And if you have a chance to do that, there's some chance you might be so lucky to get to work directly with Kristin, which, having the author whisper on your side is a good thing to have.
Awesome. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you guys for having me.
All right, Adam, we did mention AI briefly there, but we are going to do a deep dive into establishing authority in AI with Carrie-Ann Sita. I believe I pronounced her name correctly, Adam. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You did. Carrie-Ann Zeta. Yes.
Zeta. Thank
Yep.
you. She's going to be joining us on the next episode. So let's take this head on. Before we get into the episode, AI and authority building. Man, it seems like it's a loaded gun. Like, just the idea of building your authority with AI seems dangerous, but how do we weave that into helping people build authority?
Yeah, so AI is a tool. AI can be used productively as a tool to help authors and thought leaders better communicate their words. Where it is going too far, where it has gone too far, is it's the easy button. And people who, quite frankly, in my view, are lazy, say, you know what? I don't have time nor desire to actually write something on my own. I'm going to put in a couple of prompts and have ChatGPT write my blog post, or have it write a section of my book. And what those AI engines are doing is they are using publicly available information as source content to create your content. It's plagiarism, you know, calling it out for what it is, but it's also crap. It's plagiarism and it's crap. It's unethical. It's, in my view, immoral, and it's the easy way out. And it's not going to serve someone well long term to have that approach. So, what our next episode will really dive into is what are the ethical, moral, and productive ways that you can use AI as a tool to help you succeed as a thought leader, but not delegate to AI the core responsibilities of a thought leader, which is creating great content for people, and how to do it in the right way.
Awesome. Well, we can guarantee that this was not created by AI because, man, AI is not dumb enough to make something like me. So, Adam, thank you so much for the time. I will see you next time.
Joe, thank you so much.